Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is the second banana, Greg Hutchins. Good morning, Fred. How are you?
Morning, Greg. Good. Well, I take it you survived another weekend at the coast doing a little bit of surfing. Did you make it out there?
We made it out there.
And you made it back. What a deal.
And we made it back. I think we drove probably over 150 miles in search of the perfect wave, but it's all good.
That's cool. Well, the way you introduced yourself reminded me of when I was in high school. There was a court case that made the papers that somebody was suing somebody else because they didn't like the way it essentially was they didn't like the way they were being they didn't like the way the other person was pronouncing their name. And so it led to clerical errors of, whether it was their dry cleaning at the laundromat or whatever it was. I don't remember the specific of the business. And it was, upstate Wisconsin, and there's a lot of Eastern European immigrants from over the centuries that have moved into the area, and they got names that have, like my name, have lots of letters and unique pronunciations for that particular Slavic language of some sort. And so this guy would introduce himself as Mr. Smith. and the debate came up with, well, how do you spell it? Well, it's WOZKYZX2, on and on and on. And I says, well, that's not pronounced Smith. And he says, I can pronounce it any way I want. And that was the rub. That caused the problem. And so the judge said, he can pronounce his name whatever way he wants. It's not for the court to decide.
Well, I'll give you the same thing with my daughter. Her name is Margot, and it's got a French pronunciation and spelling, Margaux, much like Chateau Margaux, the expensive Burgundy. So anyway, everybody pronounces her name Margaux.
Right. In the U.S. anyway. Yeah.
In the U.S. exactly.
Yeah.
And she takes great offense at that, of course, right?
Oh, of course. And but it's, the idea, though, is that, we're a species divided by language, it seems like, in so many different cases. And I sent you a link to an article I saw this morning that was, should we use the term risk management? It came across my desk this morning and I says, there's a topic. We got to dive into that. and one of the lines in it, and I don't remember if she was quoting somebody else or somebody, it was by Carol Williams, and she wrote an article kind of looking at both sides of this. And she obviously has her opinion on what to do about this. But it was, words matter. And I run into that in statistics all the time. We have all this language, even the word reliability, in common American and British English means trustworthiness is the first definition in the dictionary. And then in variations of that is the other definitions. Nowhere does it say in the dictionary that it's the probability of successfully functioning in a specified environment over a specified duration. That's a concoction in the field of reliability engineering. But Carol brought up the point of risk management and maybe the idea that that's a burden or a disservice to the industry of people that work on mitigating or identifying or reducing risks or, those kinds of things. And I don't know. I thought this would be a topic that you would have some insights on.
Insights. You're always very, very nice. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, I think words do matter. And I think that a certain amount of words in terms of work and jobs carry implications. They denote or connote things that sometimes aren't there or sometimes aren't real. So let's look at the term risk management. And according to this article, and it's a good article, it's written by, what's her name?
Carol Williams.
Yeah. We need to do the correct Attribution.
She might pronounce it a different way, but we'll leave it as it is.
Somebody actually was butchering my name the other day, and I'm thinking, my name is simple. It's Greg, monosyllabic, Hutchins, a couple syllables. But they were butchering, and I finally just simply said, hey, I'll respond to anything. So,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, you, whatever.
Right.
But back to this. Yeah, words do matter. And the problem with risk management is maybe it's an oxymoron. Maybe we can't manage risk. There are too many unknowns and unknowables. That's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is it's laden with a bunch of implications. And unfortunately, they're negative. Now, according to this article, there's a gentleman called Tim Leach. He's sort of an expert in risk management, coming in more from what we would call assurance side. And he wants to call it certainty management. And I take a deep breath about that. Why? Because that makes it more confusing. Here's the reality, I think, in companies. And this is going to be probably something that most companies, large companies especially, are dealing with. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Last 3, 4, 5 years, the tone in the company has been sort of soft and tender and humanistic. And this is all great stuff. Balance of life. A lot of it driven by COVID. A lot of it driven by change in times.
Mm-hmm.
But the tone in many companies is changing. It's becoming a little bit more tougher. It's becoming accountability driven. And it's becoming what I would call outcomes driven as well. And I'm seeing that with my daughter's company. I'm seeing that with our clients. There's really more emphasis on the recognition that uncertainty is probably going to be the new normal for the next 10 years. And Tim Leach is saying, well, if uncertainty or VUCA is becoming the new normal, shouldn't risk management be called certainty management? It's more affirmative. It's got a nicer ring. It doesn't imply downside consequence risk. There's a lot of stuff. So words do matter.
I don't have a problem with certainty. It's also one is I think a better term would be fuzziness, because it's just whether you call it uncertainty or certainty, is the VUCA stuff means that the all this volatility just makes it fuzzy. We just really can't see the future, and it's not like we ever could. I don't think that's the point. I think the management part is the one that sticks with me more. And I think one of the things that struck me in the article by Carol was that, are you just managing the list? Are you the administrator of the list, and therefore you've done something? And I had a conversation a couple of days ago where it was, as soon as you assign, it was with one of my students, as soon as you assign somebody the reliability leader, all capital letters, that pretty much abdicates everybody else from having to worry about it at all. You've just removed that role from the electrical engineer, the software engineer, and everybody else in the organization. Oh, because Phil will take care of it. He's the reliability leader, and something like risk management, and the way you've written about it, Greg, is that it's not one person that does this. They don't squirrel away in a small cubicle in the back of the building and create a risk management plan. It's embedded from the board all the way through the organization. And if it's not part of the culture, it's not effective. And that's where I have the trouble is, it might be more the steward of uncertainty, or there's got to be a name from Dilbert that they've the demon of uncertainty or something like that. Who's the IT guy? He's the Clyde the Destroyer or something like that. It's called the IT guy. But anyway, but I think, is that a valid way to think about this? There's 2 points. One is, as soon as you name somebody with that role, then in way too many organizations that I've seen, that means everybody else doesn't have to do anything. It's not their job anymore. It's like safety. You put a safety department in there, and if they don't tell you specifically to do something, then you don't worry about it. You just go about your business, even though you know it's not safe. They'll catch it. That's their job.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's point one. Point two is I think they're missing the point. It's got to be buried in the culture, and that's not done by assigning somebody the role.
Yes. So what's happened is a lot of risk management started in the insurance field. And now it's basically moved into what we would call a compliance mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And compliance by definition is yes, no, 0, 1.
Well, isn't the 31,000 specifically not something you can get certified to? Did I get that right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And here's that. This is a big problem. I mean, back to quality and reliability.
Mm-hmm.
The standard ISO 31000 is a guideline. It's not a standard to which you get certified to. It's a guideline to help companies manage risk, manage uncertainty. And what's happening, though, is that the marketplace is driving a lot of the large certification bodies to actually develop certificates of conformance. Again,
not being certified under the regulation or the standard or something like that. But I suspect part of that is the number of ISO 9000 certifications and recertifications is going down. And I suspect, I don't know, I wasn't in the room, but when the 31,000 folks put it together, it says, let's avoid the 9,000 thing where it creates a whole industry that you get compliance, but you don't get the spirit of the idea behind the regulation. What I saw 9,000 is people would meet the minimum standard of it and only show their cards when an auditor showed up, and the rest of the time they did whatever the hell they wanted to do. And I think they've recognized that the guideline is an educational tool to nudge the industry versus a compliance, which is a race to the minimum denominator, the least common denominator, which is not useful for the industry in my mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, when you do standards and compliance, that's a cudgel. This is a shall. You've got to comply.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 0, 1. You do or you don't.
Right.
A guideline, on the other hand, is voluntary. It's compliance driven. And again, it's the power of words, the power of labels. If you brand something compliance, there's going to be an ultimate reaction to it. If you call it or label it as a guideline, there's much more positivity, enthusiasm, and engagement and willingness to try it.
And I think there's a great big if statement in there, if it's useful.
Yes.
Right. If it actually helps you with your business operation and your profitability and on and on and on, you can create better products. You can respond to the changing volatility all around us in a more coherent way. Well, then it's great. But if they're, and you've seen it where people pull up the document and go, okay, well, I need to assign somebody this job. I don't know what they're going to do, but they can make sure everybody else does what they're supposed to do. And on Tuesday, we'll send this piece of paper over to that desk. And, it's like, really? You're kind of missing the point here, guys.
And, we're back to this thing about we're entering a time of uncertainty. I think everybody agrees to that. The question now is, what's the solution? If you're a traditional risk management person, and we've talked about this before, you really can't have risk without a control. You can't have a control without a risk. It's sort of like, one, but different opposite sides of the same coin. You can't have good without bad.
Right.
And we're really entering a time of uncertainty, both from our personal lives, from a corporate, from a business, even from a career. And the question is, how do we address it? There's the mental game, there's the self-talk game. From a company, a lot of companies are simply going to say, higher uncertainty, higher risk, more controls. How are we going to implement that? Whether it's go back to work or have people. There was a big article in the New York Times this week, for example, on companies now with employees working from home have very intrusive. I mean, this is a huge article, 3, 4, 5,000 words.
Oh, I
They
saw
have,
that. Yeah. And
yeah,
they're
they have
keyboard
intrusive.
monitoring. And if you haven't been on your keyboard in 5 minutes, then you get dinged or something like that. And it's
You
like,
can't even take a bathroom break.
right.
And that's basically a reaction to working from home and the fact that companies need to address uncertainty.
Yeah, quality's got, those set up a whole slew of stuff. KPIs came and went in a whole slew of things. I still think it's just missing the point. You can do risk management in the way I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more akin to the way the organization identifies and thinks through the decisions they need to make. It's not somebody fills out a list. And there are tools like scenario planning and risk hazard analysis and, all these different variety of techniques and tools and SWOT analysis and just on and on and on that helps us be aware, right? And I agree that there's controls out there that we need to put in place, but if it's not embedded into how we make decisions to run the business, and it's just a set of controls to say, oh, look, there's a stop sign out on Highway 3, so we got to reroute our trucks.
A lot of it is just simply knee-jerk.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies, because of the culture change, are having, and you're right, it comes down to decision making. What's the tone of the organization? What's the tone at the top? And what's the tone and responsibility and accountability of people in the organization?
Well, imagine this, Greg. You just got hired as the risk manager, or somebody right out of college gets hired as a risk manager for a small company, and they, figure out, oh, I need to figure out what's threatening. What are the material things threatening our organization? And they create a list and they take it to the CEO and the board and they say, well, we can't deal with all these things, just make the list shorter. And it's like, well, does that mean go address those things and mitigate them and create a resilient organization? Or is that just lop off the ones that we really find distasteful and don't want to deal with? And the context of that meeting will give that person the direction, right? And that's where I think we're missing you can do all these activities, but unless it's part of, we're looking at reality here and we're getting a better view of it. But if you just shoot the messenger that's bringing you this better view of the uncertainties facing us, then they're just going to stop bringing you problems, or things to consider or considerations to be aware of. I think that's where I find a risk manager doesn't matter what their role is. It matters how they're incorporated into the organization. It doesn't matter what that program is. It could be a beautiful ERM program established in the organization, everybody. But if nobody knows what in the world they're supposed to do and uses the back roads and their personal network within the organization, then for their own gain, then it's like, well, what's the point?
Part of it comes down to, I just wrote down a couple of thoughts, and I know we're reaching the end of this podcast. I agree with you. Culture is all important. The challenge is culture is changing. Why? Because we're going from what I would call a softer, kinder world to a more uncertain world. Second thing is I think that companies need to define their culture much more explicitly instead of implicitly, and tell people what are the rules of engagement. The second is we need a taxonomy and structure for risk. We really don't have that in a lot of companies. A lot of different interpretations, a lot of different deployment, a lot of different architectures and designs. And the third thing, which is very, very difficult to address, is risk appetite.
Yeah, Carol mentioned that as another debate in the industry.
Well, it's a huge debate because, and this comes down to all these three areas: culture, taxonomy, and risk appetite. If you really don't have those defined, decision making is much more difficult, especially under uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I suspect these are all topics for future episodes before we dive into each of those. I'm chomping at the bit here. I'll just make a note. We'll come back to these. But the idea is that the words we use matter, whether it's in quality, reliability, safety, wherever. But I think more importantly is what's the nature of the behaviors that are behind those roles or terms or whatever. If it's, oh, I don't have to worry about it, we have a risk manager, then I think we're missing the point. And I think Carol was in her article, which is worth a read. It's not too terribly long, but I think it brings a couple of insightful ideas to the surface here. So I'll let that stand. But the idea is that we got to think this stuff through. And are we just doing the checkbox mentality, or are we actually making a difference with the terms we're using, is the lack of a better term. If it's not really working, we got to change our language and our behavior. And I think that's what I took away from our discussion here.
Totally in agreement. I agree with you.
All right. So if you're listening to this and wondering what this is all about, or if you've got questions about risk and risk management and what those terms should or should not mean, let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR, and you can leave us a message or a voice message even. There's also Greg and I and the rest of the hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn or our about pages on Accendo. So plenty of ways for you to get in touch with us. And with trepidation of the onslaught of uncertain questions that we'll be getting, I welcome them.
Me too, Fred. Listen, it's been a good talk. Went by a little bit too quickly.
As they usually do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Great. Thanks, Greg. We'll talk to you soon.
All righty, Fred. Good talking with you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.